you've spoken about how when people go against, this kind of relates to what we're talking about. You've talked about how when anyone goes against the approved narratives like Russiagate, they get the ick factor thrown onto them. But it seems increasingly like that's backfiring. You're one of the most popular journalists on Substack. So's Glenn Greenwald. Barry Weiss's project is doing very well. Joe Rogan, in spite of their best efforts, remains on Spotify, remains the #1 podcaster in the country. How much longer can our elites maintain control over our institutions when the public so clearly despises them that they seem to just go to the opposite of whatever they want them to do? As soon as they signal they like something, they want to go in exactly the opposite direction, which is a big part of the story of Donald Trump. How much longer can they really control?
I think you're right about that. I mean, first of all, the fear factor that gripped people in, especially the media business, for a long time. Like, oh my God, I don't want to be cast out of the garden, right? So I'm gonna fall into line. I don't want to have what happened to Taibbi and Greenwald. Like that was a thing. You know, nobody wanted that to be their lot, you know, to be no longer invited to sit in the green room with Ken Burns waiting to go on for 2 minutes with Chris Hayes or whatever it is. There was a lot of fear about that. Now nobody's afraid of that, because look what happens. Like, first of all, the jobs are being eliminated at a rapid pace in traditional media. There's no job security. The job sucks more than it ever has before. They make you do basically non-journalism, and in independent media, you can actually make a lot of money, which was never possible in journalism. Like, you know, which is a totally ironic, bizarre ending to this whole thing. So I think that's happening. But also the larger point that you make about Trump, which was something that everybody missed in 2016. I wrote about it a little bit, which was they like him because you hate him. The fact that the journalists couldn't get that, and still to this day don't get it, is amazing to me. I mean, shouldn't it be crystal clear to these people that the overriding appeal of Donald Trump is how upset he makes these hated people that they see on TV? There should be no mystery to that whatsoever, and somehow there is. Like, I just don't know how that happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one campaign promise he totally lived up to every single day, was making liberals cry, right? And that's really the only one he lived up to, really. I mean,
but you know what?
But that's the most important one. Well, that's the most, of course.
Yeah.
Because if the government's bought and paid for anyway and no progress is possible, then what else is at stake besides owning the other side? Like, making the other side cry is the payoff. That is politics.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and this was abundantly clear really early in the race. I remember following him around, and he would always start off by, like, a comedian. I mean, that's kind of what he is. He's a little bit of a stand-up comic. And he would always start by, instead of picking out a loser in the first row who's having a bad date, which is what the comedian always does in a real comedy club, he goes after the journalists, because we are the losers in the club. And he would always have something horrible to say about us, and it was always funny. But then it turned a little nasty pretty early. Like, look at these bloodsuckers. They hate me. They hate you. They came all this way because they want to see me fail. Well, I'm not going to fail, you know, that kind of thing. And people would hoot and holler, and they would throw stuff at us. And I thought, man, look, this is going to work. Because, you know, I'm looking around at the press pool and thinking, why wouldn't people hate us? Like, we suck. We're terrible people. And, you know, and then you go out and you interview people in the crowd, and they tell that to your face. You know, I interviewed this one guy in New Hampshire, and all he could talk about was he's not spending a dime for media. he's got all of you. He's leading all of you people around by the nose. That's why he's got my vote. I'm like, you're voting for him because he's getting free media? and the guy's like, yes, you know? And so, but my point in telling that story is if I got that answer in late 2015 repeatedly from people on the campaign trail, how come nobody else was getting the same answer? Like, it's impossible to me that they weren't getting the same response.
Well, I think the difference is, like, Matt, you were happy to go to Substack and go on your own. And I think you've even spoke to this in the past where, like, that used to be the personality type of the journalist. The journalist didn't care about being friends with people. They almost wanted to make enemies with people. They weren't afraid of pissing people off. They relished it. Whereas now the media culture is such that it's all about hanging out in that green room and getting invited to the cocktail parties and mingling with your peers. And so, you know, when Trump would point to them, these are horrible people, they would really consider that really an affront to them and their entire social class and their social clique. Whereas, you know, somebody like you who says, all right, well, you know, fuck it. If I can't say what I want at Rolling Stone, I'll open a Substack. I'll open my own shop. Like, that's sort of old school in the way that I think a lot of these media people don't really connect with anymore.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, definitely, I hate to be all back in the day about it, but, you know, reporters always used to have this independent streak that was kind of a job requirement. Part of, you know, you couldn't do it unless you had a little bit of that in you, I think, once upon a time. Reporters are always a little bit jerky, and good ones always are. The best investigative reporters are, I mean, I've met a lot of them, they're absolutely impossible people, right? But that's part of what makes them so great is that they don't let you rest until they get what they want. And, you know, that's not always pleasant, but that's part of the job. And also, moving from organization to organization used to be kind of a mark of a good journalist. Like, a good journalist would always get fired sooner or later from wherever they worked. It was just, it was inevitable that there was going to be a clash with the editor, and you know, the byline was going to be in another magazine the next day. I had a friend in Russia, this guy Leonid Kritakov, who was famous for getting fired every time he wrote something. Like, he cycled through every newspaper in Moscow, and he used to be proud of that. I don't think that's not as much of a thing now, which is too bad, because if you're going to be a herd animal and a social animal, like, do it in a profession where you can make more money. Like, that's what I don't understand about it. Like, why go into journalism particularly to be that kind of person?
Oh, it's more high profile. I think it's for that. It's for the status. But you also write about how the class has changed. That used to be a working class job. And what I very often see with these journalists, like the way they absolutely despised Bernie Sanders. I don't know if you read, Thomas Frank did this great article, SWAT team for Harper.
Oh, no, I didn't see that one.
That was great. It was, he just broke down how the Washington Post covered the Sanders campaign. And it was all from the perspective, you know, to them, because of their class, they represent this kind of Eastern Seaboard centrism. And he was just anathema. He was this creaky old corpse of the New Deal come back from the grave to haunt them. He was just out of bounds. They ruled him out of bounds. And that's really what you see in their reporting. It's a class perspective. I don't think it's that. Again, a lot of people, when we talk about the media this way, think we're suggesting some kind of conspiracy. You don't need a conspiracy where class interests converge. They simply saw him that way. They weren't lying about it. They weren't writing these vituperative op-eds because they were making it up. That's how they saw him. He doesn't belong. This isn't right. We're not going back to that.
Yeah, they thought of him as a line jumping backbencher, you know, communist or whatever it was, like whose job was to maybe make a headline once every 3 years or whatever. and make sure that the actual lefties voted for the real candidate. The number of times the words "real candidate" appeared in a story with Bernie Sanders was so incredibly insulting. The other thing I think they didn't like about Bernie is that he was sincere. Like that's a quality that journalists can smell out, and they see that as, I think they see that as somebody who's not willing to do what it takes to win. Like if you're not a good liar, then you're not qualified to be in the club. But yeah, the looking down the nose at Bernie was deeply distasteful, and you know, I was a big fan of Bernie's. I thought he was really onto something, and but for a few mistakes, he really could have done something special. But he was really more undone by the press than I think any other political figure in recent times was.
Please clap.